I'm a diner worker, and I've been here for quite a while. But there's one story from my time at this job that still haunts me. It all started with a wandering man, a strange figure who would appear at the diner around the end of each month. I never paid much attention to the murmurs about him until it happened to me. The first time I saw him, I was just doing my shift when the usual thing happened. Melanie, the boss, got sick and had to leave early. Right after she went home, he walked in, a man in his middle age, quiet and unassuming, sitting in the corner. I'd heard the rumors from the other staff about how we should just ignore him, but curiosity got the best of me. I called across the diner to ask him what brought him there. To my surprise, he actually answered, though his voice was polite and calm, nothing like what I expected. But something about him felt off. It wasn't until later that I began to piece it all together. There was something unsettling about him. Something about the way he existed in our diner just didn't fit. He never caused a scene, but whenever he showed up, it was like he disrupted the very air in the room. A week later, Melanie invited me to a meeting with a man dressed sharply in a suit, an agent of some sort. At the table, he started asking about the wandering man. Apparently, he was part of a government operation. This wandering man was a phenomenon they had been monitoring for years. He wasn't just any strange diner visitor. He was part of something much bigger, something I wasn't prepared for. The agent explained that the man had been wandering around for ages, causing bizarre and sometimes gruesome events wherever he went. The government's interest wasn't just casual. They were observing him, though they couldn't exactly bring him in. Apparently, he wasn't from around here. The agent hinted at something much darker behind the man's visits. It wasn't just weird, it was dangerous. But there were no details, just ominous words that made my stomach turn. After that meeting, I didn't want to know more, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trapped in a much bigger mystery than I ever imagined. Over time, the presence of the wandering man became something I had to accept. He'd show up every month, always around the same time, and I had learned to dread those days. The agents who would sit quietly in the diner were a constant reminder of what was really going on. But what made things worse was the worker turnover rate. New staff would come in, only to leave soon after. No one really said why, but it was clear that something about the diner wasn't right. The veteran staff, like Melanie and I, had learned to live with it. But the newcomers didn't stay long. Then Malcolm showed up. He was new, eager to prove himself. He bulldozed through tasks, always wanting to do more. He was keen to impress. Melanie and I gave him the spiel, the warning about the diner's rules. No one was supposed to approach the wandering man. It wasn't something to question, just something you followed. Malcolm didn't listen. He was too curious. One night, while the wandering man sat at his usual spot, Malcolm went up to him. He froze, completely unaware of what he had just done. The wandering man's demeanor shifted from calm to something more sinister. The next thing I knew, Malcolm and the wandering man were gone. Just like that, they vanished. No noise, no sign of struggle, nothing. The agents scrambled into action. The place was filled with frantic murmurs and coded language over radios. "Alert level black," they said. I had no idea what that meant, but I knew it wasn't good. It was only a matter of time before we learned the consequences of Malcolm's mistake. Melanie quit shortly after. She knew the risks, but she had her own breaking point. She'd known this would happen after the 10th disappearance. As for me, I stayed, not because I had to, but because I was stuck. My soul felt heavy with guilt, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed Malcolm. The next time the wandering man visited, things escalated. It was the dead of night, and there he was, standing right in front of me. I knew something terrible was going to happen. He smiled, speaking to me in a calm voice. He knew I'd been curious. He admitted that this was all a game to him, but when he left, he did something that left me horrified. A cake box appeared on the counter. Inside, I found Malcolm's severed head. It was lying on a bed of flowers, a disturbing display. And there, written in childish handwriting, was a note. "I brought him back, just like you wished." I couldn't breathe. It was clear now that this was no ordinary man. This was something far darker, something beyond explanation. The agents were silent as always, observing, learning from these events, and none of us could stop it. The worst part of it all? Realizing that no matter where you are, you're never truly safe. The wandering man could show up at any time, anywhere. No one's safe, not even in the most remote corners of the world. I've been blind since birth. Growing up, everything was described to me with such vivid detail that I never quite understood why seeing was so important. I didn't have a point of reference to compare to, so it never really bothered me. My world was made up of sounds, smells, and textures, and that was enough for me. My family lived in a single-floor ranch house, and while I couldn't see it, I had a clear mental map of it. I knew where my bedroom was, where the kitchen was, and even where the bathroom was. I had spatial awareness. Each wall had its own texture, and I could feel the differences that others never noticed. I rarely ever fell over. Only when my father or a visitor would place something out of place would I lose my balance. It was usually the visitors, and that's when my father would shout. His anger always felt a bit different when the visitors were around, and I couldn't help but feel the strange tension in the air. Visitors came infrequently, but when they did, my father would always tell me not to speak to them. He'd become uneasy if I mentioned anything I had seen through touch or sound, and I noticed it made him more upset than usual. When I asked him why, he would avoid answering. It was clear that something about the visitors unsettled him deeply. Then came Ellie. She was the first one to break the silence. She asked me my name and why my face was so messed up. She was sitting in the living room, her breathing harsh, as if she had a blocked nose. It reminded me of when my father had a cold and struggled to breathe through his mouth. I didn't understand why she would say such a thing, so I touched my face, trying to figure out what made it so strange. When I asked her if I could touch her face, she hesitated, but eventually allowed me. Just as my fingers brushed her face, my father entered the room and asked me who I was speaking to. I lied and said it was nobody. He immediately got angry, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. He always punished me for talking about the visitors. Sometimes he would leave me outside, telling me that I had to learn the sound of the cars on the road. He said if I wasn't careful, they would kill me. I would wait, listening for the cars and knowing exactly which direction to run back to the house. I heard Ellie's voice again that evening. She whispered, saying she was scared. I couldn't answer her. I was terrified of what would happen if I did. The next time I asked my father about Ellie, he refused to talk about her. When I mentioned she had asked about my face, he laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that didn't reach his eyes. It was forced. I knew it wasn't genuine. It wasn't until I was older that my father explained everything. He told me that we lived in a special place, connected to the other world. Sometimes people who had died in pain or without peace would slip through and try to communicate with the living. He explained that, because I couldn't see, I was more sensitive to them. They could sense that I was listening when no one else could hear them. He said that I had to ignore them, or they would latch on to me, never wanting to leave. He warned me that the dead would try to trick me, that they wanted to be alive again. The first time I encountered one of these spirits was when Alex appeared. She told me she was lost and didn't know where she was. I wanted to help her, but I knew that if I did, I would be in trouble. I stayed silent, and Alex faded away. My father saved me, and I was thankful for that. After that, I knew what I had to do to keep the spirits away. But then, Sarah appeared. I was sitting in the living room, listening to the TV, when she spoke to me. She was desperate for help, asking to find a way out. I remained silent, but she insisted. She begged, saying she was scared and lost and wanted to see her daddy. I knew I couldn't speak to her, but it was so hard to ignore her. She said her father was dead, and I refused to acknowledge her. The room around me began to shake, and things started to move on their own. In a panic, I opened the front door, hoping that she would leave on her own. But when I closed it, everything was quiet again. The TV was the only sound, and I waited, listening carefully to make sure she was gone. But then I heard my father's voice. He was calling for me, saying he thought he was dying. I panicked, screamed for help, and ran outside. I shouted for anyone to hear me. A woman responded and promised to help. I could hear the sounds of sirens, and soon a paramedic arrived. He asked about my face, and I told him I was fine. But when he touched my face, something felt wrong. The pain was unbearable. I was told to keep an eye mask on to let my eyes adjust. After a while, I stayed with my uncle and aunt, who I didn't even know existed. They were shocked by what had happened, and they tried to comfort me. It was hard, but I was adjusting to having a little vision, something I had never known before. As I started to use the internet more, I stumbled across an article on a true crime site. To my horror, it mentioned my father. It claimed that my mother had gone missing after my birth, and that my father had always wanted a daughter. The article detailed the discovery of 14 bodies in the basement, and how one victim, Sarah Frank, had escaped after being tortured. She had killed my father with a kitchen knife. I didn't want to believe it at first, but when I saw the names of the victims, Ellie Farmer and Alex Riddle, I realized the truth. I had spoken to them. Now I wonder, did I speak to them before or after my father killed them? And I wonder, what else was my father hiding from me? The island of Cold Rock was nothing without its lighthouse. It was the defining feature of the island, a towering stone monolith that loomed over the wild, storm-tossed Atlantic. But Cold Rock Keep wasn't like other lighthouses. It had a body count. For as long as anyone could remember, the island had been known as a cursed place. Ships had always been drawn to its jagged shores, where they would inevitably crash, leaving their crews to perish in the unforgiving sea. The legend spoke of a coven of witches who once lived there, practicing their dark arts, believing the ocean would protect them. And it did, but only for a time. The witches eventually vanished. Whether they died, were killed, or simply faded away was unclear. But the shipwrecks didn't stop. In response, the lighthouse was built, but it did nothing to halt the deaths. In fact, it seemed to only intensify them. The townspeople soon came to believe the lighthouse itself was cursed. They stopped going near Cold Rock, passing down warnings to their children. Don't drift too close to the lighthouse. My brother George was a fisherman, a man who had always followed the old warnings. He captained a small boat, the Trout's Kiss, though it didn't belong to him. He was an expert sailor, and nobody was more skilled at navigating through storms than George. He feared nothing except Cold Rock, and he made it clear to anyone who would listen. I'd sooner row a skiff through a storm than sail past Cold Rock, he'd say. But then, 3 days after my 9th birthday, he was gone. The Trout's Kiss capsized, his boat smashed into the rocks, and he and his first mate were thrown into the sea. I went to bed with my brother alive, and when I woke up, he was dead. No goodbyes, no last words, just gone. It was the moment I realized that the legend of Cold Rock Keep wasn't just a myth, it was real. George was a superstitious man, and he would never have sailed near those cursed rocks unless something had pulled him there. I think in that moment, I believed it was that same darkness that had started pulling me toward Cold Rock. Maybe it was grief, or maybe it was just a childish desire for revenge. But a week after his funeral, I took my brother's skiff out into the harbor. I rowed toward Cold Rock Keep. The island had taken enough from us, and I couldn't stand the thought of it continuing. So on that brisk summer night, I made up my mind. I would be the one to confront it. But as I drew closer, panic gripped me. The boat tipped over, and the lighthouse vanished from view as I was swallowed by the cold sea. When I woke, I was surrounded by the wreckage of my skiff, tossed among the jagged rocks of Cold Rock's coastline. The lighthouse loomed in front of me, towering like a giant against the night sky. The glowing light swept over the ocean, hypnotizing and beckoning me toward it. I walked toward the lighthouse, passing gravestones carved with names I recognized. Old, forgotten souls who had died near these shores. Men who had fallen from the lighthouse or been driven mad by it. Cold Rock Keep was a monstrous place, taking what it wanted and leaving death in its wake. But I had come here to change that. I was just a child, with nothing to protect me but a rock and my brother's old pocket knife. When I reached the lighthouse, I found the doors wide open, revealing a place littered with beer cans and graffiti. A spiral staircase led upwards, and something called to me. I knew it was the light at the top, the source of the island's curse, the thing that had caused so much pain. I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest, until I reached the top. The hatch was locked, but I smashed it open with a rock and pulled myself into the room. Blinding light flooded out, but as I climbed further, the light began to fade. The bright, burning light turned into a distant speck, and darkness enveloped me. True darkness. The kind of darkness that feels like being buried alive. I couldn't find the hatch. I shouted, cursed the lighthouse, and cried for my mother, knowing she would never stop searching for me. I cried for my father, who would blame himself for being away. Most of all, I cried for my brother, who had always warned me to stay away from Cold Rock. I had ignored him, thinking I knew better. Now I was lost and there was no way out. And then I heard voices, nasal, high-pitched voices that made my blood run cold. Look at this one, he hasn't any light. The voices were mocking me, speaking of light, and suddenly I realized they weren't human. I was surrounded by two witches, spirits who had been haunting Cold Rock for centuries. They had lived on the island peacefully until their lives were stolen by a group of sailors. In their revenge, they had caused countless deaths, leading ships to crash on the rocks. They told me their story. They explained how they had used their magic to lure the worst souls into the rocks, purging the island of evil. But they admitted that sometimes innocent people got caught in their net. They had never meant for my brother to die. It was an accident. The first mate, Reed Vallis, had dragged him under the water, and they couldn't save him. I was devastated. My brother had died because of their magic, and they couldn't even bring him back. I asked them if they could help, but they told me they couldn't. Their magic wasn't precise. It was a sledgehammer, not a scalpel. But then something changed. The witches Agatha and Beatrice began to glow. Their light grew stronger, and in that moment, they decided to do one last spell. They pulled me into a tight embrace, and when I woke up, I was lying on the beach, with salt in my hair and seaweed down my shirt. I was alive. The police found me and thought I had fallen into a coma. But when I woke up, I knew something had changed. My mother was overjoyed, but I couldn't shake the memory of the witches, their twisted magic, and my brother's death. I looked out to sea at Cold Rock Keep and silently thanked the witches for everything they had done, for helping me find closure, even if it was too late for George. The dream I had that night was long and vivid. In that dream, I played catch, traveled the world, and shared pints with my brother. But most importantly, I said goodbye to him. It was the goodbye I never got in life.